Hello, my friends. Today I have a pleasure of speaking with Fabi Belgardt, who is a trauma-informed yoga teacher and somatic coach in training. Hello, Fabi.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me here to have this conversation. So, Fabi, I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work that you do.
Yes, so as you already said, I'm somatic coach in training and yoga teacher, trauma-informed yoga teacher, with a background in social work, actually. So I think that's pretty much where it starts as well. But what I do now is I support other female practitioners and coaches and self-employed business owners with easing stress and overwhelm that comes so much with the job description, supporting the emotional and mental well-being and the challenges that come alongside it to feel more at ease and to feel more grounded and more connected to themselves. And yeah, as I said, so I started really in with my social work studying, and I always struggled myself with my mental health, and I've always been very anxious and people pleaser and very, very much in that state most of my life, which I thought was normal. And I was drawn to yoga initially during my time in uni. And it was quite fascinating going to my first classes, coming out for the first time in a long time, feeling like you're in that bubble of your mind is quiet, because I mean, if you're always in that anxious state, there's always stuff going on in your mind. It's very exhausting. So it was really, it's really a big step in my journey, I think, first coming to yoga and then continuing with that. And I think generally I've always been somebody who seeks for support outside of myself. I always self-help books, get all the books and reading all the advice, and out of interest in general, but also because I think there was always something I thought needed fixing, not enough, and trying to find that outside of ourselves. And yoga was the first thing like that helped, that feel different than just another exercise or something else that's on my list to do. I started to get really into it, and then I moved to the UK. So I'm originally from Germany, so I studied in Germany, and then I moved to the UK now 6.5 years ago, and pretty much straight away dived into my yoga teacher training, which I really loved, and it was a big part of my journey. But then I was starting to work in frontline work, supporting as a work and learning coach, working with people experiencing homelessness, which I'm really passionate about and really important. But I also had my other passion of mental health, well-being, yoga. There was always kind of the two parts. And the more I've always thought in my frontline work where I'd kind of just get on with it, everything was fine. Never thought I'm taking things home. But then it came to the point where I experienced early stages, if not full burnout, without really realizing it, it's kind of coming to that stage of resentment, not enjoying the work as much anymore, not caring as much anymore. And that was quite significant, but I didn't really know what it was at the time. And then quite typically I got signed off. I could have had 2 weeks off. I had to reflect on that earlier, but I said, no, it's fine. I just have the week. I think it's a very typical thing of, not wanting to let people down. And I think in hindsight, when I reflect on that, there's a lot of the behaviors that you're already having comes up from that people pleasing of taking on extra work, wanting to be recognized for your work, doing more, always going the extra mile. And of course, it's not just work. I think that's something that always stands out for me. It's not just the work you do, it's also your private life. Things come together. Anyway, I reached that point of it was just enough. I was crying all the time. It was an emotional mess. I was all over the place, crying when I got to work. I just couldn't focus anymore and just completely withdrawing from social contact, from friends, from anything. But burnout as such wasn't really a concept to me at that point. I just knew something wasn't right anymore. And luckily at that point, in the midst of all of that, I came across trauma-informed restorative yoga at that point, which was, again, a huge part in my journey and really impacts what I do now. Because that experience of being supported and being able to let go of extreme pressures and expectations we have on ourselves through just doing nothing, essentially. It was quite life-changing, really, and it made a huge difference. Came, like things sometimes play out, it came just at the right time. And I bring that a lot into my work now as well. And then alongside with that, I then, you kind of continue, get on with things, try to juggle all the things, having like being partly employed, being in frontline work still, but also starting kind of, okay, I want to bring all my kind of experience a bit more into wellbeing practice, yoga practice, and teaching more and making that side of it work. So it was quite a juggle, half employed, half self-employed. And I struggled a lot. And again, I think that's why I mentioned it before, those behaviors that we already have in employed roles, that kind of people pleasing, doing all the work, doing all the extra things, we carry then into self-employment. And I did that very much. And I was constantly pushing and pushing and pushing. And we talk a lot about seasons, and I was talking a lot this week about it. I was always in my summer doing, but not resting, not acknowledging what I've been doing. Until I got again to my breaking point. And I mean, I was all over the place. I was constantly up and down, so emotional. It was, I always say it's a roller coaster of emotions, because I'd be on top of it and it's like great, doing all the things, trying to make everything work, because I was passionate about it. I wanted to bring more yoga and these practices to people. But then if things don't work out, and it's so challenging, there's so many emotional things to it as well. I would just crash, cry, absolutely devastated. And so this is just not for me. And I mean, pretty much at that point, I came to you. I remember when we started working one-to-one in that instant. And I just knew something needed to change. And I think that was quite a pivotal point for me, knowing that it's not just about, that's, I think, also when it went for me beyond yoga, because not just having something you do once a week, but actually really lifestyle changing, because otherwise we have our lovely spa day, which is lovely, but then we come back to our old behaviors, our old stresses, and I think realizing that, and that I've been going through the burnout cycles, was quite pivotal for me and quite important, and really impacts as well how I work now. And then, I mean, I'm getting the timeline a bit mixed up, but in the midst of that, I also started doing your 80-hour trauma-informed training, which was really great, because I think I was at a point where I loved yoga, but there was something missing for me. Mm-hmm. And I think having gone through that quite a lot of stress, burnout, everything, there was a part of me that didn't feel seen anymore within that practice, that something was misaligned. And having come from a social work background, I feel like there was a connection missing between the two. And then having done your 80-hour trauma-informed training was really great to bring these things together, and have these very foundational practices of it. Yeah, as I say, there's this connection of that that social worker that's still within me, of really working with people in a very different way, I think what always stood out for me is that I felt very seen for the first time in a long time, through that kind of work.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. I think it's because, thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's because you had this background with social care, and you had this chunk of education and work within the social care. I think knowing, and I can, as you know, I can relate to it because of my background in working in social care as well. It's having those two parallel ways of being, isn't it? It's like understanding the biopsychosocial approach and having this really wonderful practices of yoga. And, how do you bring them together, knowing that both of them are important and both can support you in a different way, and both are, life-changing when we embrace them.
Absolutely. And I noticed as well, where I really like the trauma-informed approaches, where it's kind of typical people pleaser and I want to do things right, perfectionist. I would often get myself in yoga if I just focus on the practices, on getting it right, on getting the posture right, on get, there was that aspect extremely. And then shifting more into the trauma-informed approach, it was less about that, but actually about meeting myself where I'm at. And I always remember the moment when you said, I think it was more the compassionate checking in practice is about, you can just lean back into your chair, you can just relax, and I have just to have privacy. This is great. I don't have to do it so well. I can just, I can find my own way. I can meet my needs. I can do things differently. And the more and more I think that shifted a lot then in the way I approach myself as during like day to day. It's like allowing myself, okay, I don't have to do it in a certain way. I can adjust practices. I can adjust things in a way that work for me and my needs. If I'm tired, I can just take it easier. And that's changed so much as somebody who tries to be, very perfectionistic and do everything right as much as he can do things right, because he can't really. So yeah, that was had a huge impact. And for myself, I think that's what really stood out for me for the training, not just how I work with other people, which brought for me obviously that kind of social work and yoga together, how I work with people, and like co-product, like working more with people instead of just instructing. But also for myself, I'll support myself. I mean, that made a huge difference of learning kind of the self-compassionate checking in practices of knowing how I am and how I can support myself better. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that I really love about you, knowing you, for quite a few years now, is how self-aware you are, how conscientious you are. And hearing you talk about this, this kind of people-pleasing and perfectionistic streak, I'm sure many of us, well, I can relate to that, and I'm sure many listening to this can relate to that as well, and how it can creep up. And what I love that you just said is like, it's not just in one area of our life. It's like how we do it, when we are in employment. It's how we do it in our wonderful business when we are self-employed, and we vow that we're going to do it in a different way. And yet those habitual traits, this unconscious trait, keep running, pushing us forward. And, this striving and pushing and showing up and often being hard on ourselves. They can still be here, even though we might be a yoga teacher or somatic coach or work in trauma-informed way. If we are not careful, it will perpetuate. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think a lot of the times it's easier to hold that space for other people. Actually reminding ourselves is so difficult. And everyone I did work with kind of experience the same. They're all practitioners, they're all coaches, they all support others, but it's so hard to. It's easier to tell somebody else not to be hard on themselves than not be hard on ourselves. And I think there can be so many expectations, and a lot of them are just from ourselves of what we think we should be doing. And a lot of them, I had to learn that a lot of my expectations are not manageable. And, we cause ourselves a lot of stress by thinking that we need to achieve more than we maybe need to in a moment. Or that's possible.
Yeah, and there is so much pressure on us, isn't it? It's like you've made the same as myself. You took this big step of going from working in a field, supporting others, having a steady paycheck, and then maybe working on the side a bit, and then taking a big step into, I'm going to go full time. And then there is this whole host of challenges, isn't it? It's like, well, how do I support myself? How do I make it sustainable? How do I do it that I don't work 24/7, 7 days a week, being on all the time, especially if you've already got that kind of tendencies. And, for me, coming back from social care, I know that I trained my system into this way of, you just got to do it. You just got to show up. And it's like over the years, it's trained into you. But I think it's also cultural.
Yeah.
Like, you come from Germany, I come from Poland, and both countries have got very kind of this work ethic of working really hard. And, all of those programs, all of that conditioning runs unconsciously within us. And unless we start paying attention and noticing, it can lead to, again, I can relate to your experience of hitting burnout. It's like you just start hitting burnout because it's unsustainable long term. And so I wonder how, because you are a somatic coach in training, and I'm very happy to say that you chose to train with me through the institute. I wonder how that fits in, and how what's your experience of it? How is it different from, for example, the trauma informed yoga that you've done before?
Yeah, so really it shifted a lot for me so I found the ATL trauma training gave really great foundation at that point. I think if I hadn't done that, plus we were working one-to-one as well for support, I would have struggled going into self-employment when I decided to leave my job. And I think something I was already fascinated. I was always teaching more slower and gentle, because I think that's something that always really stands out for me, is a gentler approach to ourselves, because we can be so harsh on ourselves. And so, as we said, those high expectations, being gentler. And then I got really fascinated as well with nervous system regulation. And especially if we spend so much time in that higher anxious state of people pleasing, it's not sustainable. But for me, for a long time, that felt like my reality. That was my normal. I didn't realize, I was constantly in that space, so I didn't really realize it can be different. So nervous system regulation, that kind of really fit into it. And then I was already teaching kind of slower anyway. And I knew beyond that, I wanted to have something that I can teach beyond just practices, but also how to integrate that, because I think that really stood out for me. Because I had the practices, I had all the different tools, but I knew if something needed to change long term, there needs to be changes in my habits, and to really create a nervous system friendly environment. Because otherwise, we just talked about all those habits that we take over from old behaviors, the things that we learn from cultural and families and all that kind of feeding in. So I was always very curious about kind of changing habits and bringing these things in as well, so we can actually create long-term change, and it's not just a practice that we do once a month or every other month, or we have a break every few months. So really having long-term changes and creating a life and business that's nervous system friendly, that really supports us. I mean, I'm a very sensitive person. A lot of people I work with are very sensitive, and to be able to create that. So when I then came across your current training, the 160-hour teaching coach for women training, that really resonated to me straight away, because it kind of packed everything in one that I was curious about anyway. So working with women, which I find so important and curious, and we've been learning so much about so many great approaches of working with women and understanding our needs as women better, and where I work so much with stress and emotional overwhelm and emotional mental well-being. It's just really acknowledging where these things all come from as well, from society, and the pressures we have from society, and the guilt around rest. I think that's just something that always comes up in my work, and something I always really want to hold space for, the guilt around rest, and really shifting these beliefs that we have around holding space for ourselves. Prioritizing our needs is so challenging when we're not used to it. So it's been so helpful really looking at all these different approaches and understanding all these things on a deeper level. Of course, there was some awareness anyway, but like kind of on a deeper level, understanding these things, or going through the seasons. We just talked about that a little bit. Understanding, how the seasons impact us, and how we push through all the time, but don't actually take time to acknowledge things that we're doing, or we're not resting. So that was a huge part. So that's what I really liked there, was kind of focused on women and supporting women, because I was already working a lot with women and seeing all these traits, and it's something that I see in myself and other people that I work with that I really wanted to support more, and the different phases we go throughout our life as well. But then the somatic side was, as I said, I was already kind of interested in that kind of slower pace, gentler pace anyway, so that really it just resonated so much with me. Especially, I remember you reading out the kind of definition of somatic coaching. I was like, yes, that's exactly what that's kind of finally bringing everything together that I've been doing over the years. That slowing down and connecting with the body more. And I mean, I've always been a very mind-focused person. So connecting with the body has been challenging over the years, and the people I work with also find it challenging. So going with that on a deeper level, but I've realized over the past years the importance of it. So connecting more with the body and knowing what's going on for us and holding more space for ourselves. So doing that on a deeper level. And then, of course, still that trauma-informed approach, which is so important for me from my whole background, but bringing it all together again in one training has been really, really great. And but always really appreciate having practices straight away that you can integrate for yourself and for the people that we work with. Because as you always say as well, it always starts with us, doesn't it? So I always like that kind of very practical approach of having things that we can do for ourselves to support ourselves, and then we can bring it into our work with other people. So I've really enjoyed that, and it's already impacting my workloads and what I bring into it and all the different approaches. It's just so, I think what's always been important for me and where I couldn't just stick with one thing was having a more wholesome approach. And it's not just one thing, is it? So having a more wholesome approach. And I really like that about the training, because we learn so many different approaches and internal family systems, so many kind of understandings of what's going on for us, that we can bring that together in a really nice, wholesome approach to working with somebody. And it's not just one thing, but, really finding what works for somebody, and we can work in different ways for somebody, which is really great.
Yeah, I love what you just said. And my experience of, you and other female practitioners coming to the training, it's not like you don't know lots of stuff. Like, already lots of stuff. You already learned lots of stuff, but often they kind of a little bit separated. It's like, how do you bring it all together? How do you really understand a very simple framework for that gives you like a roadmap that you can use, and within that, knowing what your client needs, using different practices for what they need, because there are so many different practices out there. There are so many different approaches. It's not about approach or technique. It's about really what your client needs, and being able to meet them where they need you to meet them. And then use the appropriate techniques from there. And actually having those quick wins, isn't it? It's like, you can learn all of this stuff and you can understand it, but you have to have experience of practicing it yourself. Just like any other thing. Like, you could talk about yoga, you could talk about healthy diet, you could talk about mindfulness, somatics, or understanding your needs, and you could really understand it. I should do that, which is what many of us do, isn't it? It's like, I need self-care. I need to slow down. I need to take care of myself better. I need to put better boundaries in place. I need to say no. We know that. Yeah. But from knowing to doing and doing it consistently, day after day, that's a big change, a big shift that many of us really struggle with. Yeah. And I loved what you just said a moment ago, about those needs. Isn't that fascinating that we can sometimes be in a position of supporting other women and love it so wholeheartedly and really kind of, say all of this stuff and support them so well and see what they need. And somehow we just get somehow blind to what we need and do stuff that actually, we don't do stuff that we say to others are important and that we know that are important. Yeah. Somehow we can kind of miss out this big chunk of taking care of ourselves. Yeah. And which then leads to, what we were just talking about, the burnout, the resentment, the exhaustion, and ultimately giving up sometimes on our dreams and on our mission. So I wanted to ask you, what's your mission? What do you want to do? What's your because that's one of the things that we talk about in the training. It's like, yes, we're learning this, and then it's like, oh well, what are you going to do about it? What is the impact you want to make? How are you going to bring it into real life and into your community, so it doesn't become like one of those trainings that, oh, that was really great and I learned loads and I just continue doing what I'm doing, and I want to use it fully. So what's your mission and what's your vision as you move forward?
That's a good question. For me, it's very much about that mental health, emotional well-being, and supporting more women because I think it's so great when we have a passion that we want to share with others, but that we have support at the same time, that we can support ourselves sustainably, long term. It's not just another quick thing that we're doing, another plaster that we put on and then we go back to old, but really supporting other women to support their own nervous system. A lot of people I work with are very sensitive, but so creative and caring and things, but bringing that all in so it doesn't have to be one or the other, because I think a lot of the times it can feel like certain traits of ourselves can be in the way of being successful or doing all the things, or but it doesn't need to be that way. And I think all the people I work with are so passionate about supporting other people through their work, but then we have to give it up because we're not supporting ourselves. So I think that's really something that's really important to me. Is I think every practitioner, every counselor, and coming from social work, we all need support ourselves, and bringing that more and more in, and knowing that we can do things differently in a nervous system friendly way. And honestly, a couple of years ago, I probably wouldn't have thought it's possible to feel differently, but so much shifted for me over the past years with doing these practices more regularly. That's why it's so important to share them now with other people, because I know it can be different. We don't have to be constantly in that anxious state and that extremely overwhelmed state, but it can actually be a bit more steady and more at ease, and it doesn't have to be all that hard. Of course it is, self-employment is always going to have challenges, but we don't have to do it ourselves. And I think that's really important. I think that can be a huge part of, I have to do everything by myself, but having support, having the tools. And I think one thing for me for that is really important is understanding ourselves better. And I think a lot of the time that's understanding ourselves, and self-compassion is very much at the core of what I do, connecting with our needs. Because I think the better we understand ourselves, the better we know what's going on for ourselves and make time to check in with ourselves, and the better we can support ourselves. Because as I said before, I didn't know I was going through the burnout cycles. I didn't know what was going on in my nervous system, but learning more about that, understanding that, made such a huge difference for me. And then knowing how to support myself. And I tried so many things before. I tried everything. It was like typical, trying to do all the things. But actually, now it's very different because I do what helps me in the moment. I'm much more connected to my needs. So that's something I really want to bring more forward and support more women with, holding that space for themselves, making self-care a priority, alongside all the challenges that it brings, the mindset, beliefs, everything behind it. Nervous system regulation, being in a more regulated space, being able to support themselves in a more, because it's very empowering. I always see it. I love when we're in a session and somebody says, oh, actually, can we wait for a minute? I need to go to the toilet. And it's like, great, yes, please do. Because I know what it's like to not go to the toilet because I don't want to let anyone down or, so really standing up for, really meeting your own needs on a daily basis, and can be such small steps. Meeting your own needs and being more connected to what's going on for ourselves and understanding ourselves better is something I'm very excited about sharing more with people.
Yeah, I love that, Fabi, because this is so key. It's when you were talking, it's like a memory of this comedy drawing sketch thing that came to my mind that I remember seeing a long time ago of two people standing next to each other, and it's like, the writing around it was something along the lines of the social worker looking much more exhausted and worn out than the client. And I think it comes with the, having worked in that field and supporting others, I know that it's part of the culture. And I know also that within the self-employment it's quite prevalent as part of the culture of just like really working long hours all the time. And it isn't as sustainable. And I think what you are talking about empowering women to really recognize and honor their needs, to do it in a different way, that, you know, the kind of ripple effect that it will give to then the younger generations. I mean, we are seeing it already with people finding more balance working from home, people working in, women especially working in much more sustainable way. You know, there is, even though there is still the pay difference between women and men, um, women are showing up much more. Women are building their businesses. You know, the research shows that there is loads more women going to business these days, and really supporting women to build those sustainable businesses where they can look after themselves, their needs, their health, their well-being, and look after their families through their business and look after their clients. It's not that, as you just said, not one or the other. I think that's a really huge shift within our culture, to actually do that, and to, you know, it's something so important.
Yeah, I think
So
it's
I,
really great now. Yeah,
yeah,
giving that I mean, I'm so glad I went into self-employment because I can support myself so much more sustainably and really look after, you know, apart from the challenges, but really looking after the nervous system. So it's great to see other people, you know, sharing their passions and doing it, but it is possible to do that without burning out. And I think that's really important.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, the more we talk about this, like you talking about your story and, you know, everything that you've done, it really is very inspiring, and it gives hope to other women that it is possible. You can do that. Yes, it was hard. Yes, you struggled. Yes, you kind of went through difficult times, and you are on the other side. You know, you've got clients, you are working, the money, you know, your business is supporting you, and you can create the business on your own terms, how you want. But you do need to learn those skills, and you do need to approach it in a different way, and you do need to prioritize getting to know your needs and looking after yourself. So I wonder if there was one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who wanted to follow in a similar path to you, what would that be?
One thing is difficult, but I think something that comes up for me is trusting. It comes more and more for me is trusting the process, because when you're in the midst of things, it feels like it's just never ending. And I mean, I know the feeling all too well. It's like you're doing all the things, but nothing's happening. But trusting the process and letting go of what you think your business should look like, or how, you know, how it should all unfold, because I've found very much that it unfolds in so many different ways. And I think when we let go a little bit of that, it can be a bit easier of just letting things unfold. And you always talk about which doors open, you know, just following a little bit alongside, just letting it all unfold, trusting the process. And with that, also getting support. I think that's been so important to me. I think without support, I don't know, I would have struggled a lot more. Yeah, support for your business, but also for your mental and emotional well-being, because I think it's both so essential, to not do it all by yourself, to, you know, have the tools and the support to support yourself, and have somebody hold space for you as well, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when we know that in social care, we know that in therapeutic settings, and somehow within the, you know, yoga or well-being or coaching, there might be less of that.
Yes.
You know, it's like you hold space for other people, you need somebody to hold space for you as well, for you to process and grow and learn and heal and, you know, develop in the way that you need to. So if people were interested in finding some more about your work and wanted to connect with you, wanting some, you know, support, some coaching or some, you know, support with you, where can they find you?
Yes. Yeah. So mainly through our website. So Fabienne Belgardt .com. That's it. It's a short one, but I'm sure we'll share it as well. On social media, same kind of handles, Fabienne Belgardt Wellbeing, and coaching. So through support, I support through one-to-one support, and have a free program coming up as well, which I think is going to be really nice for, especially at the end of the year, where, you know, kind of shifting a few things maybe.
Okay, tell us a little bit more about your program. Let's hear it.
So it's a 6-week somatic coaching pre-program, which will start in November, Calm and Connected. So very focused on understanding ourselves a little better, our nervous system, and building some steps on how we can support ourselves better. So kind of looking at mindset and beliefs that come up around rest and self-care, because I know it can be really challenging. So it's not just practices, but actually really looking how we can make it sustainable and really make changes in our lives. And then with that, having somatic and nervous system practices to come back to that more regulated space when we experience a lot of stress and overwhelm. Because I mean, stress and sensory overload is so ongoing when we run a business. So having all these tools and practices that can really support ourselves in a very empowering and sustainable way, according to your needs. So that's what it's Calm and Connected, because it's about your own connection as well, and finding what works for you, what's going on for yourself.
Brilliant. And that's online?
Yes, that's an online course for 6 weeks, starting 2nd of November. So quite soon.
Wonderful. And that's for women?
Yes,
owners,
yes, for female practitioners, coaches, business owners. You know, if you support others through your work, or you're self-employed and supporting others. Yes, so having a little space with other women to explore and support yourself.
Brilliant. I mean, I love online work and programs like this, because really you can log in from anywhere.
Yes.
You can join in, you know, this kind of traveling stuff. Yes, there is there is a wonderful connection when you do in-person stuff. But I think the pandemic, you know, in the last few years have taught us that we can do really great work online, and we can connect with others and build communities and be really part of the group and the healing and learning and growth that comes with it. So it sounds like a really, really lovely program.
Yes, I'm very excited for it.
Great. Thank you so much, Fabi, for taking time to speaking with me. And
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And as Fabi said, you can find Fabi's details and also in the description, follow the links in the description of the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.